Don't follow me." The words cracked through the frigid dusk like a whip. Sharp, cold, final. Clara Wells didn't turn her head. Her heels struck the pavement in clipped, furious rhythm as she strode down Tremont Street. The collar of her cream coat flipped high against the wind, her clutch clutched tight like it held the last thread of her control. Behind her steady footsteps. Not rushed, not timid, just there. She hated that. The day had already been chaos, a board member threatening resignation, an investor demanding another forecast revision, and yet again the media's vultures asking whether Wells Tech's Ice Queen had a soul. And now, this. She whirled around. The janitor froze mid-step. Dim streetlights threw long shadows. He stood 6 feet away, hands at his sides, wearing a plain navy uniform dusted with salt and city grime. Late 40s, maybe. A strong jaw peppered with gray. Eyes calm but unreadable. Not deferent, not threatening. Just watching her. Clara's voice dropped an octave. I said, "Don't follow me." Still, he didn't speak. His gaze flicked just slightly past her shoulder. She almost scoffed. And then a rush of motion. A blur from the alley. The man lunged. "Get down!" She was shoved sideways, her ankle twisting as her heel skidded against the curb. A grunt. The sound of something tearing. A glint of metal. A knife. A scream stuck in her throat. The janitor's body collided with another man's, driving him backward into the light. The attacker staggered, slashed out wildly. The blade caught cloth. Blood. Clara's back hit the wall. She blinked, dazed, as the attacker fled, vanishing into the shadows as quickly as he'd come. The janitor sagged to his knees, one hand pressed to his side. Red stained his uniform like ink spreading in water. Only then did he look at her. Still silent. Still calm. Still seeing her not as a CEO, not as a headline, but as a person who could have died. 15 minutes later, sirens painted the night red and blue. The street buzzed with voices, radios, flashing lights. Paramedics crouched beside the janitor, wrapping gauze around his ribs. A young cop took Clara's statement, eyebrows knitted in confusion. "You sure you've never seen the guy before?" Ma'am Clara nodded stiffly. The officer glanced at the janitor. Lucky he was there. She didn't answer. Lucky wasn't the word. She stood a few paces away, arms crossed over her chest, watching from behind a mask of composure as they loaded him into the ambulance. He didn't ask for her. Didn't even look back. Just stared at the sky like he was counting stars behind the storm. Back inside Wells Tech Tower, hours later, Clara paced her glass-walled office like a lioness in a cage. The skyline pulsed beyond the window, a frozen sea of ambition and danger. She picked up the sleek silver pen on her desk, her father's, and snapped it in half with a sudden jerk of her hand. Why had he followed her? He shouldn't have been there. It wasn't his job. It wasn't his business. And yet, that look, that final look. Not pleading, not proud, just steady, grounded, like she wasn't the first person he'd shielded from the world and wouldn't be the last. Her assistant knocked. "Ms. Wells, HR wants to know if we should report the incident formally." Clara turned. No, I don't want this story spreading. But he saved your—" "I said no," she snapped. The assistant flinched. Clara exhaled sharply. "Send a care package. Quietly. Flowers, fruit, whatever people send. But no press, no emails, no mention in internal comms." "Understood." "Yes, ma'am." She sat at her desk after the door closed, turned off the lights, let the office go dark around her, and in the reflection of the glass she saw herself. Alone, alive, shaken. Across the city, in a cramped one-bedroom apartment above a shuttered corner, Deli Miles. Rowan peeled off his bloodied shirt, gritting his teeth. His son, Ethan, stood beside the kitchen sink, carefully opening the first aid kit. "Dad, you need stitches. I'll be fine. You always say that. And I'm still here, ain't I?" Ethan frowned. "But that was a knife. Why'd you jump in like that? You don't even know her?" Miles didn't answer right away. He winced as the alcohol hit skin, then quietly, because no one else was gonna. Ethan looked down. You could have died. Better me than her. Silence stretched between them. Finally, the boy asked, Is she nice? The CEO, Lady Miles, gave a humorless chuckle. She told me not to follow her. Ethan blinked. So you followed her? No, Miles stared out the tiny kitchen window. I just didn't leave. Ethan unwrapped a roll of gauze, his hands trembling slightly. You always say heroes don't wear capes. Miles glanced at him. That's right, Ethan met his eyes. But they carry mops. Miles smiled. Just a little. Sometimes. Somewhere deep in the basement logs of Wells Tech's internal security, a redacted file auto-synced. Camera feed corrupted. Motion sensor glitched. Someone had been watching, and they didn't like what they saw. The janitor never said a word. The anchor's voice murmured over drone footage of flashing red and blue lights, but what he did said everything. Clara Wells turned off the hotel room television with the remote clenched so tight her knuckles whitened. She'd spent the night at the Langdon, a luxury suite she only used for emergencies. And this qualified. Her name hadn't been mentioned on the news. Not directly. Just a female executive walking home from Wells Tech HQ, but the internet had already sniffed her out. Her phone buzzed endlessly with blocked numbers, email notifications, and reporters begging for comment. And in every single image, it wasn't her face that dominated the headlines. It was his. The janitor. Unshaven, bleeding, silent, but standing like a wall between her and a knife. Back at Wells Tech Tower, Miles Rowan walked into the back service entrance uniform, clean but bandage visible beneath the collar. His shift started like every other day, 5:30 a.m. sharp. The world didn't stop turning just because he'd gotten stabbed for someone who hadn't even said thank you. He walked past the HR office. They didn't call him in. He passed the break room. No donuts. Just two interns whispering and watching him like he was someone else. Like he'd become visible. He hated it. As he pushed the mop cart down the marble corridor of the executive wing, he herded applause. Soft, awkward, but real. A few junior staffers clapped as he passed. Someone tried to hand him a Starbucks. He nodded once, then kept walking. No smile, no stop. Just the quiet rhythm of mop wheels on tile. Upstairs in her office, Clara stood beside the window watching it unfold. She'd returned through the underground garage to avoid cameras. Hadn't spoken to anyone yet. Not even her assistant. Not the board. Not legal. But she saw him. Through the tinted glass. That same measured pace. Head down, shoulders square. As if nothing had happened. As if saving her life was just... Tuesday. A voice behind her interrupted. You should say something. Clara turned to see Margaret, her communications chief, standing in the doorway with a tablet. Mid-60s, sharp eyes, silk scarf. One of the few people Clara trusted. Say what Clara replied flatly. That you're okay. That Wells Tech supports its employees. That we're not. Heartless. I didn't ask him to follow me. I didn't even know his name. Margaret arched a brow. So maybe it's time you learned it. Clara's jaw tightened. We are not turning this into a circus, she said. Margaret stepped forward, calm but firm. It already is, Clara. And if we don't control the narrative, someone else will. Clara looked back out the window. Miles had disappeared into the lower lobby. I don't owe him anything. No, Margaret said. But maybe you owe yourself something. That afternoon, an internal email went out. Wells Tech would like to acknowledge the bravery of one of our staff members during an incident outside HQ yesterday. While respecting their privacy, we recognize their service and courage. It was unsigned, generic, soulless. Exactly what Clara had wanted, except something about it sat wrong in her stomach. Meanwhile, in a quiet corner of the janitor supply room, Ethan Rowan sat cross-legged on a crate of paper towels reading a dog-eared graphic novel while waiting for his dad to finish his round. "You know," he said, flipping a page, "if you wore a mask, you could totally be Batman." Miles raised an eyebrow from behind a shelf of cleaning supplies. "Batman's rich," Ethan grinned. "So you're like Floor Man." Miles snorted. "Real intimidating." Ethan looked up serious now. "But you saved her, right?" That Lady Miles didn't answer immediately. "She didn't thank you." "No. Not even like a head nod." Miles shrugged. "Not everybody knows how to say, 'thank you.' Doesn't mean they're not thinking it." Ethan was quiet a moment. "I'd say it 100 times." Miles leaned against the shelf, exhausted in a way that had nothing to do with his wounds. He looked at his son, the only reason he ever got back up. "Kiddo, if I ever do something worth remembering, I hope it's not just because I took a hit." Ethan tilted his head. "Then what?" Miles smiled softly. "Because I kept standing." Later that night, Clara sat in her parked car 3 blocks from her apartment. The streets were wet from a light rain, the kind that coated the sidewalks like glass. She didn't remember starting the drive. Hadn't even told her driver where to go. She just needed to move. Needed to breathe. She looked down at the object in her palm, a silver pen. Snapped in 2. Her father's. She hadn't realized she'd brought it with her. Clara gripped the broken pen like it could still write something whole. Like maybe if she squeezed hard enough it would say what she couldn't. She wasn't ungrateful. She wasn't cold. But she was scared. Scared of what people saw when they looked at her. Scared of needing anyone. Scared of the version of herself that froze when danger came. Because she'd survived before. Alone. On her own. With no one standing in front of her. And now someone had. And she didn't know what to do with that. The next morning, Miles found a package waiting in the janitor's locker. No card, no name. Just a basket of overpriced fruit, a stiff bouquet of orchids, and a note typed in 12-point Times New Roman. "Thank you for your service. We wish you a swift recovery." He looked at it for a long moment, then tossed the flowers in the trash, and walked back to work. But as he pushed open the door to the executive floor, he didn't know someone was watching. Not from the board, not from PR, from the shadows, from the network, and they didn't like the janitor's name trending at all. It wasn't where she belonged. That was the first thought that hit Clara Wells as her heels tapped unevenly along the cracked sidewalk of Dorchester Avenue. The streets here didn't glisten with corporate glass, they pulsed with the hum of laundromats, flickering neon deli signs, and the uneven breath of a neighborhood just trying to hang on. She wrapped her coat tighter around her frame. The cold felt different here, closer, more honest. Why was she even here? Because Margaret wouldn't stop dropping passive-aggressive remarks about taking real responsibility. Because the board wouldn't shut up about public image and community touchpoints. Because she hadn't slept since the attack, and when she closed her eyes, she saw him, Miles Rowan, not with blood on his shirt, but with a strange stillness in his face that made her feel seen. And guilty. So she asked HR for an address, under the pretense of a wellness follow-up, but mostly because something inside her kept whispering, "You owe him something you can't email." Unit 3B sat above a shuttered corner bakery with a crooked for lease sign and the ghost of cinnamon rolls in the brick. Clara raised her hand to knock, then paused. Laughter. She turned her head toward the sound. Across the street in a small weed-ridden park, a boy sat cross-legged on the edge of a wooden bench. A sketchbook rested on his knees, a red crayon moving furiously across the page. His brow furrowed and focused tongue poking from the side of his mouth. Beside him lay a school backpack patched with duct tape and a folded paper bag that had once held dinner. She should have turned away, should have walked up and knocked on the door. Instead, she walked toward the boy. He didn't notice her until her shadow crossed the paper. He looked up. Green eyes, freckles, familiar jawline. "Hi," he said simply. "Not afraid, just curious." Clara blinked. Hi, you lost or something? No, I'm looking for someone. Miles Rowan. The boy brightened. That's my dad. A pause. You must be the lady he saved. Clara's stomach tightened. How do you know that? He shrugged. They didn't say your name, but I saw it on TV before Dad turned it off. You look like a CEO. She let out an involuntary laugh. Is that a good thing? The boy grinned. Depends on the movie. Clara sat on the bench beside him before she realized she'd made the choice. He held the sketchbook toward her. I drew this. It was simple, almost childlike, but striking. A city skyline. A man with a mop in one hand, a shield in the other. Behind him, a woman in a long coat, half hidden by shadow. That's you, he said, pointing to the figure, and that's my dad. Clara traced the lines with her eyes. And the shield, she asked. That's not real, the boy admitted. But it's how I see him. She looked at him for a long beat. What's your name, Ethan? Ethan? How old are you? 10. But I read at high school level. Dad says I ask too many questions, but I think that's his way of saying I'm awesome. Clara laughed again, this time warmer. I think he's right. The boy studied her face. You don't smile a lot, do you? That caught her off guard. I'm smiling now, she replied. Yeah, but it's a lonely kind of smile. She blinked. Kids didn't say things like that, not unless they'd seen things they shouldn't have. She opened her mouth to ask something else, but a familiar voice cut across the street. Ethan Miles. He stood on the stoop of the building, face lined with worry until he saw her. Then it shifted. Hard. Guarded. Clara stood immediately. I was just. He was already walking across the street. Not hurried, not hostile, but each step measured like he was reining in something heavier than anger. You shouldn't be here, he said. I know, she replied. You didn't answer my messages. I didn't know what to say. He looked at Ethan, then back at her. What are you doing with my son? We were just talking. His jaw ticked. I came to thank you, Clara said quickly. In person. You already sent a fruit basket. That wasn't from me. He crossed his arms. Then what is this damage control charity? Or a press op? Her voice dropped steady but not sharp. It's guilt. That stopped him. She took a breath. I've built my life on never needing anyone. On staying ahead. Staying cold. Because being cold means you survive. But that night I didn't survive because of myself. She looked at him. I'm here because my son wanted me to come, she added softly. The part of me I buried. Miles stared at her, and then slowly his features softened. Just a touch. Ethan piped up Dad. She likes your shield. Miles glanced at the sketchbook, and for the first time that evening he smiled. Barely. You hungry? He asked, suddenly looking at Clara. She blinked. Excuse me, kids due for dinner. I was going to reheat mac and cheese. If you can handle powdered cheese and stale crackers, you're welcome to stay. Her instinct screamed to say no. But something else, a quieter, older voice, said, Sit down, Clara. Okay, she said. And for the first time in a long time, she didn't feel like she was walking into a trap. She felt like she was stepping into something real. The elevator dinged, but no one spoke. Clara stepped out first, heels echoing against polished tile as the doors slid open to the underbelly of Wells Tech, where the gloss of power gave way to fluorescent hums and the quiet hum of forgotten records. The air down here smelled like old paper and resignation. Behind her, Margaret followed, tablet in hand, face unreadable. You know, Margaret said most CEOs don't come to the records floor unless they're hiding a body or looking for one. Clara didn't smile. I need to know what we've buried. They reached the secured archive room. Clara swiped her master badge. Access denied. Margaret lifted a brow. You're locked out of your own company's files. No, Clara murmured, eyes narrowing. I'm locked out of someone else's. She turned to the junior clerk behind the glass. I need the employment record for Miles Rowan. Full file, all clearance levels. The clerk hesitated. That file was flagged last year. Transferred to legacy encryption. Only director-level admin can unseal it. Clara blinked. I'm the CEO. Yes, ma'am, but the system says it was redacted under security protocol. Falcon 9. Margaret looked up from her tablet. That's a Department of Defense seal. Clara froze. Wait here, she told the clerk. Back in the hallway, she leaned against the cold concrete wall and let out a slow breath. Why would a janitor have a DoD-sealed employment file, she asked. Margaret tapped her pen. Because he's not just a janitor. Across the city, Miles Rowan was on his knees beside a broken heating pipe in the sub-basement of a Wells Tech satellite office. He wasn't supposed to be there. This wasn't his assigned building, but he'd gotten a call from his buddy George, a night janitor who'd been chewing on painkillers and divorce papers all week. I owe you, George had muttered. Miles waved him off. You owe me lunch. No onions. The truth was, Miles didn't mind the grunt work. He liked the silence, the predictability. Pipes didn't talk. They didn't lie. They just leaked, unlike people. As he tightened a rusted valve, his radio crackled. Rowan, you there? HQ wants you to swing by records when you're done. Something about ID verification. Miles stiffened. Copy that, he said, setting down the wrench. But his hand lingered over it. Old instincts don't die. They wait. Back at HQ, Clara's office was darker than usual. The curtains drawn. The coffee cold. She sat in silence, staring at a printed photo on her desk, Miles taken from a blurred security cam feed. The timestamp matched the day he was hired. 4 years ago. But the man in the photo wasn't holding a mop. He was wearing a uniform. Tan. Badged. With a patch on his sleeve. Stryker Unit 19. U.S. Army Combat Rescue. Margaret's voice broke the quiet. Clara. There's more. Clara looked up. He was involved in a hostage extraction. Rural Syria. 2014. The mission was classified. 2 operatives died. 1 survivor made it out. Let me guess, Clara said. Miles. Margaret nodded. He was discharged a year later. Honorably. Then disappeared for 3 years. Reappeared in Boston. No mortgage, no credit history. Just a mop and a shift schedule. Clara whispered, Why would someone like that take a janitor job? Margaret studied her. Maybe he got tired of being a weapon. Downstairs, Miles stood outside the records office. The clerk inside looked terrified. Mr. Rowan, I wasn't told what to give you, only that your ID needed a rescan. Miles nodded calmly. It's all right. The clerk scanned his badge. The system blinked. Access granted. The screen glitched. Then a new prompt appeared. Welcome back, Captain Rowan. Clearance active. Level 3. The clerk blinked. Sir, I didn't know you were... I'm not, Miles said quietly. Not anymore. He turned, walked away, and headed up the service stairwell 6 flights until he reached the executive floor. He didn't knock. He pushed open Clara's office door. She looked up, startled. Their eyes locked, and everything unspoken crackled between them like lightning ready to strike. You're not just a janitor, she said. You're not just a CEO, he replied. They stared. No words. Only the silence of 2 people with too many truths buried under too many layers. Finally, she said, Why didn't you tell anyone who you were? He leaned on the edge of her desk, not defiant, just tired. Because people treat ghosts differently. Clara frowned. Ghosts, I lost my unit. My brothers. The only reason I lived is because I stepped left instead of right. That's not heroism. That's math. And you think mopping floors erases the debt? No. But it keeps me from owing more. She swallowed hard. He looked down at the photo on her desk. So now you know, he said. What are you going to do with it? She met his gaze. I haven't decided. He nodded once, then turned to leave. But before he reached the door, she called out. Miles. He stopped. Why did you follow me that night? He looked over his shoulder. "You weren't being followed," he said softly. "You were being hunted." Then he left, leaving behind a room colder than any boardroom she'd ever sat in. That night, Clara sat alone on her penthouse balcony, wrapped in a blanket, holding Ethan's sketch of Miles like it was scripture, and for the first time since she was a child, she whispered, "Thank you." Miles had never stood in a hallway like this before, where silence echoed against glass and marble, and doorways didn't just separate rooms, but entire lives. He held a plastic grocery bag in one hand, the kind that creaked when you moved it. Inside, a box of powdered mac and cheese, a half-loaf of day-old bread, and a can of corn. Not exactly a peace offering, more like habit. When you're a single dad, you always bring food, even if the address read Penthouse Suite 38B and the doorman stared at you like you were delivering pizza to a throne. The door swung open. Clara stood barefoot, her hair loosely tied sleeves rolled up over a cashmere sweater, and for the first time, she looked like a person, not a headline. Miles lifted the bag. Didn't want Ethan eating hotel room peanuts for dinner. Clara blinked, then stepped aside. "Come in." The penthouse was the kind of place people whispered about floor-to-ceiling windows, books arranged by spine color, a fireplace operated by remote. But the air inside didn't feel lived in. No clutter, no family photos, just taste and tension. Ethan bounded into the living room, socks sliding on the wood floor. "Dad, did you know you can see the river from her bathtub?" Miles raised an eyebrow. "That a fact?" Clara shrugged. "He wanted a tour. He's very persuasive." "He gets it from his mom," Miles said. Something flickered in Clara's eyes. "Where is she?" Miles looked down at the grocery bag. "Gone. Since Ethan was 3. She nodded, not pushing further. "Kitchen's that way." They boiled water together in awkward silence. Miles stirred the noodles like a soldier counting heartbeats. Clara leaned on the counter, arms folded. "I haven't eaten mac and cheese since college," she murmured. "Then you've been missing out," Miles said. "It's the poor man's risotto." Clara laughed, genuine, unexpected. It cracked something open. She watched him for a moment, quiet. "Then, why did you really bring him here tonight?" Miles didn't look up. He asked. Ethan Miles nodded. Said he wanted to see where the lady with the sad smile lived. Clara's voice caught. "Is that what he calls me?" Miles finally met her eyes. He's observant. So is his father. Miles said nothing. Clara walked to the window, looking out at the night. "When I was 10, I lived in a rental apartment with bars on the windows. My mother worked 3 jobs. My father, well, when he showed up, it wasn't a good thing." She turned to face him. "Power was my escape. Money. Control. I built walls because I didn't want to end up like her, exhausted, small, alone." Miles answered gently. And now Clara's smile was soft. Hollow. "Now I'm just alone. With better furniture." Dinner was eaten on the floor. 3 mismatched bowls, plastic forks, a single cloth napkin folded 3 ways. Ethan told stories between bites about a kid at school who tried to climb a vending machine and how he wanted to invent a cereal that changed color with temperature. Clara listened completely still. "You're good with him," she said when Ethan ran off to draw. Miles shrugged. "I'm better because of him." Clara leaned back on her palms. "You know what scares me most? What that for someone like me, someone the world calls successful. It took a janitor and his son to remind me what real connection feels like." Miles looked at her long and unflinching. "Success isn't about being above anyone," he said. "It's about knowing when to kneel." She swallowed. "And when to open your door." Later, as Miles helped Ethan into his coat, Clara walked them to the elevator. "You didn't have to come," she said softly. Miles looked at her. "You didn't have to let us in." The doors slid open. He stepped inside. But just before they closed, Clara said, "Miles." He looked up. She hesitated. Thank you. For saving my life. Miles held her gaze. No, he said. Thank you for starting to live it. The elevator closed, and Clara Wells stood in the hallway heart-pounding, realizing she had no idea what kind of life she'd been living before. That night, alone in bed, she opened her email. She typed, "Subject Rowan file reinstate access. Full clearance. I'll take responsibility." Then she opened another window and searched community shelters in Boston accepting corporate funding. She sat back, fingers trembling. Not with fear, but with the quiet, unfamiliar weight of choosing something different. Elsewhere, on a rooftop across the city, a figure stood watching the glowing skyline. In his hand, a crumpled newspaper. Janitor saves CEO. The man scoffed, then lit the paper on fire with a flick of his lighter, and whispered, "Not for long." The snow had returned to Boston, light, lazy flakes falling like ash outside the high-rise windows. The city buzzed beneath, unaware of the quiet storm brewing above. Clara Wells stood in the glass-walled executive lounge of Wells Tech's 28th floor, sipping black coffee that had long gone cold. Across the room, board members mingled, pretending to care about quarterly projections and industry chatter. But her attention was elsewhere. On the boy. Ethan sat alone near the far window legs, dangling off a velvet armchair too big for him, a worn sketch pad in his lap. His pencil moved quickly, eyes flicking from the skyline to the page and back. He looked content, untouched by the politics of towers and titles, and yet he saw everything. Miles had come up only briefly to drop off paperwork for facilities. His presence now tolerated, even occasionally greeted, though still more ghost than employee in this polished world. Clara had invited Ethan along, hoping to test the waters of a future she still wasn't brave enough to name. "Your son's incredibly intuitive," she'd told Miles earlier, to which he'd replied without missing a beat, "He was raised by silence. Makes him listen better than most." Now Clara approached slowly, careful not to startle the boy. "What are you drawing?" she asked, kneeling beside him. Ethan didn't look up. "You." Clara blinked. "Me." He tilted the pad toward her. It wasn't just her. It was the street outside Wells Tech at night, the scene of the attack. But not from the ground. From above. Like someone watching from the rooftops. It showed a man stepping forward, arms out. A knife flashing. And, behind him, her. Face half lit. Frozen. But it wasn't the violence that caught her breath. It was the detail. The eyes of the attacker, small, narrow, filled with something almost familiar. "You saw this," Clara whispered. Ethan nodded. "I was in the car, waiting for Dad to finish. I saw the guy hiding near the alley. He had a gray beanie and a scar here." He traced a line from his cheekbone to jaw. "Why didn't you tell anyone I tried?" Ethan said, voice soft. But Dad didn't want to make things harder. He says, "People don't always believe kids." Clara's chest tightened. "Ethan," she said, voice catching. "Can I keep this drawing?" He hesitated, then nodded. "Make sure the right people see it." She smiled. "I will." Then his eyes narrowed, gaze drifting to a security camera above the door. "Someone else saw it too," he said. The camera up there was blinking. Clara turned. The lens blinked red once, then went black. Later that evening, Clara sat in her office, blinds drawn, Ethan's drawing spread across her desk. Her hands trembled slightly as she dialed a private extension. "Detective Vega," came the voice on the other end. Clara wasted no time. "Laura, I need you at Wells Tech. Tonight." 20 minutes later, Detective Laura Vega, short, sharp, with the posture of someone who didn't miss much, stepped into the executive suite, snow clinging to her coat. "You're not usually the one calling," Laura said, shutting the door behind her. "I think someone erased footage from the night of the attack." Laura raised an eyebrow. "You're just realizing this now." Clara slid the drawing across the desk. Laura's eyes scanned the page. Then she looked up, her voice shifting into something colder. "Where did this come from? My janitor's son." Laura leaned in. "That's almost photographic memory. Kid's sharp. He saw everything. And now I'm starting to think someone else did too." Laura's jaw tightened. "You want me to pull surveillance logs? I want you to pull everything. I think someone inside Wells Tech wanted to keep this quiet. And I want to know why." Laura pocketed the drawing. "I'll run facial recognition on the scar pattern. See what comes up." Before she left, she turned back. "Miles doesn't know about this, does he?" Clara shook her head. "Not yet." "Maybe don't wait too long," Laura said. "That man's carrying enough ghosts already. Don't hand him another." Meanwhile, on the lower levels, Miles was finishing his shift. He moved like he always did, measured, quiet, invisible. But his hands lingered longer on surfaces. His gaze paused on corners. Instincts that hadn't dulled with time whispered something wasn't right. As he emptied a trash bin into the barrel, a piece of folded paper fluttered loose. He picked it up. It was a printout of his own personnel file, but redacted. Dozens of black lines. Except for one highlighted sentence, subject was last under surveillance in Kandahar 2016. Cleared for domestic civilian placement under Operation Hollow Echo. His blood ran cold. He shoved the paper in his pocket and walked faster than he had in years. Clara returned to her penthouse that night more exhausted than she could explain. She slipped off her coat, poured a glass of water, and stood at the window. Boston glittered below, elegant, ruthless, oblivious. She glanced at the drawing again on her kitchen counter. The way Ethan had drawn her shadowed, uncertain, fragile. She didn't like that version of herself, but maybe. That version wasn't wrong. Her phone buzzed. Miles. She hesitated, then answered. "Clara," his voice came low and even. "We need to talk. Tonight. Is Ethan all right?" "He's fine." "What happened?" Miles paused, then quietly said, "I think we've both been watched longer than we realized." Miles Rowan had known fear in many forms. The tight snap of a tripwire under boot, the thud of a helicopter blade that came too late, the hollow click of a rifle chamber that should have saved someone, and didn't. But nothing sent ice through his veins like what he found in the mailbox that morning. A plain, white envelope. No return address. No markings. No postage. Inside a photo. Ethan, at the park, alone, drawing. His head tilted, tongue poking out in focus just like he did when the world disappeared. And in the bottom corner of the frame, a boot. Black. Just stepping into view. Miles didn't speak as he re-entered the apartment. Ethan looked up from the breakfast table, a spoon halfway to his mouth. Dad Miles offered a faint smile. "Eat up, buddy. I've got to head out for a bit. You okay?" "Yeah." He leaned down and kissed his son's hair. "Just need to check on something." 20 minutes later, Clara opened her front door and knew something was wrong the moment she saw his face. Miles looked like a man walking out of smoke, still whole but carrying fire. She stepped aside, wordlessly letting him in. He dropped the envelope on her kitchen counter. The photo slid out. Clara stiffened. "Where did you get this?" "My mailbox." No name, no message. She picked up the photo with trembling fingers. "This was yesterday." "I know. Did you recognize the shoe?" "Not the shoe," he said, voice tight. "The shadow behind it." Clara looked closer. Barely visible in the background, just over a concrete ledge, was a silhouette leaning from a rooftop. Watching. Waiting. Miles's jaw clenched. It's him. Nathan Hale. She turned sharply. "The man you testified against." He nodded. "After I left active duty, I took a security consultant job overseas. Nathan was part of a financial pipeline funneling funds into trafficking networks. We were supposed to stop the flow. I blew the whistle. He went down. Hard. And now he's back. He did 3 years, got out quiet, changed his name on record, But he's not quiet anymore. Clara gripped the edge of the counter. He's targeting you. Miles met her eyes. No, Clara. He's targeting you. They sat across from each other in the living room. Light filtered through the tall windows, but it felt like dusk. I thought this ended the night he tried to stab you, Miles said. Clara shook her head slowly. I keep going back to the night it happened. How fast it was. How precise. He didn't come to rob me. He didn't ask for my purse. He didn't even look at me like a person, just a target. And now he's playing a different game. Miles leaned forward. He wants you scared. He wants me desperate. He's not trying to kill. Not yet. He's trying to control the board. Clara's voice was barely a whisper. Why now? Miles exhaled. Because we got too close. She looked up. To what? To each other. Ethan peeked out from down the hallway. Am I in trouble? They both turned. Clara stood. Of course not. The boy padded into the room, clutching his sketchbook. You're both really quiet when you're scared. Clara knelt. Ethan, has anyone ever talked to you when I wasn't around? Someone you didn't know? He shook his head. Just the guy who gave me a cookie at the bodega. Miles's heart skipped. What guy? I didn't know him. He said he liked my drawing and gave me a cookie in a paper napkin. Clara and Miles exchanged a glance. What did you do with it? Miles asked. Ethan grinned. Didn't eat it. It was oatmeal raisin. Clara laughed softly, hand over her chest. Miles exhaled. Thank God for bad cookies. That night, Clara insisted they stay at her place. She wouldn't say it outright, but the message was clear. If someone wants to get to Ethan, they'll have to come through me. They made pasta, played cards, pretended things were normal. After Ethan fell asleep on the couch, a comic book still open on his chest, Miles stepped out onto the balcony, arms folded against the cold. Clara joined him. He won't stop, will he? She asked. No, Miles said. Not until he thinks he's won. Or until we prove we're not pieces on his board. Clara looked up at the sky, clear cold, full of stars. I used to believe life was chess, she said. You move fast, think ahead, control the board. But now, she glanced at the couch inside. Now, I think life's more like jazz. Miles turned to her. Jazz unscripted, messy, full of wrong notes that somehow make the music matter. Miles smiled, then gently, what if he comes for me next? Clara met his gaze. Then I'll stand in front of you, like you did for me. Later, when she turned off the lights and checked the locks 3 times, she didn't feel afraid. She felt something else. Ready. And somewhere outside, beneath a flickering street lamp, a man watched her penthouse window. Not with rage, with calculation. And a matchbook in his pocket. The words burned into it read, We all have debts. The air inside the warehouse was colder than outside. Concrete walls, rusted beams, dust motes frozen midair hanging like ghostly ash. It smelled of mildew, old oil, and bad memories. Miles Rowan stepped into the hollow space without hesitation. No flashlight, no weapon, just instinct. He'd texted Clara an hour ago. Take Ethan and stay inside. Lock every door. Don't call the police yet. She'd replied, You go alone. I'll never forgive you. He hadn't answered, because some promises had to be kept with silence. The message had come earlier, burned into the back of a matchbook left under his windshield wiper. Same place you watched me fall. 7 p.m. Alone. He remembered the place. He remembered the mission. And he remembered Nathan Hale screaming in the dirt, blood on his face, betrayal in his eyes. Miles had told the truth then. And now truth had come back wearing a different face but the same fury. He reached the center of the warehouse. No sound, no movement, just his breath white in the air. Then a slow clap. Miles didn't flinch. Nathan stepped out from the shadows. Leaner now. Paler. But his eyes same as before. Dead on the inside. And proud of it. You came, Nathan said. You knew I would. You always were predictable. Miles studied him. And you always were a coward. Nathan smiled, still trying to be noble even now. Miles's jaw tightened. You sent a threat to a 10-year-old boy. I sent a warning. There's a difference. You stalked him. I reminded you what happens when you play judge. You broke the law. I broke the system. Nathan's voice rose sharp, and you crawled back into it, hiding behind brooms and blue-collar pity. Miles stepped closer. That boy is the only reason I didn't come here with a gun. Nathan laughed dry and bitter. Because you think you're still clean. A long pause. Then Miles said quietly, because I'm not. Nathan reached into his coat. Miles didn't move. Out came a burner phone. He tossed it at Miles's feet. Pick it up. Miles did. The screen lit up a live feed. It was Clara, sitting in her penthouse kitchen, talking to Ethan. Miles's stomach dropped. How I'm not stupid, Nathan sneered. You think I'd wait around for you to outplay me? No, I've got someone close, someone in your fancy glass castle. Miles's hands clenched around the phone. Nathan's voice dropped to a whisper. You chose her. After all this time, you chose the Ice Queen. Miles looked up calm as a loaded gun. No, I chose good. You just don't recognize it anymore. Suddenly, metal creaked above. Nathan looked up surprised. A second later, a flashlight beam sliced through the darkness. Boston PD hands in the air. Detective Laura Vega's voice. Nathan spun. 2 more officers emerged from the shadows, weapons drawn. Miles exhaled relief laced with regret. He hadn't wanted Clara to call Laura, but damn, he was glad she did. Nathan lunged, not toward the cops, toward Miles. The tackle drove them both into a pile of crates. Splinters, grunts, blood. But Miles didn't fight back. He pinned Nathan's arms, eyes burning into him. You came for war, Miles said, breathless. But you forgot war doesn't forgive, Nathan roared. You don't get to walk away clean. I never did. Cuffs snapped. Officers dragged Nathan away. He screamed as they pulled him back. I was supposed to matter. Miles sat in the dust, bleeding from the lip chest, heaving. Laura crouched beside him. You all right? He gave a weak smile. I've been worse. Back at the penthouse, Clara paced like a storm. Ethan sat on the couch, hugging his knees. Why did he go alone? Ethan asked softly. Clara stopped. He thought it would protect us. Is that what dads do? Clara knelt in front of him, her eyes shining. Good ones don't protect with fists, she said. They protect with love. And sometimes, that means standing alone. Ethan looked down. Clara reached for his hand. But he's not alone anymore, Ethan. Not ever again. Later that night, a knock at the door. She opened it before he could knock twice. Miles stood there exhausted, bruised, but breathing. Clara didn't speak. She threw her arms around him. Tight, fierce, silent. He held her back like he was anchoring himself to the world again. When she pulled away, she whispered, I told you I'd never forgive you if you went alone. Miles gave a tired smile. And I told you I'm not used to being forgiven. Ethan peeked around the corner. Dad Miles looked over smiling. You okay, buddy? Ethan nodded. Were you scared? Miles paused. Yeah. Even though you're big and strong, Miles walked over, knelt beside him. Especially because I am. Ethan tilted his head. Yeah, that's allowed. Miles ruffled his hair. It's the only way to stay strong and not turn cold. That night, Clara lit a candle on the windowsill. Not for peace, but for new beginnings. Below, the city exhaled beneath snow. Inside, 3 people sat around a table, not just surviving, but finally beginning to heal. And somewhere in a prison cell, Nathan stared at the ceiling. Not with anger, with confusion. Because even villains expect to be feared, but never forgotten. The lights inside the ambulance were too bright. Miles squinted against them, his breathing shallow chest tight not from the bruises, but from the weight of everything that hadn't been said. A paramedic pressed gauze to his shoulder. Another tried to insert an IV, but his eyes weren't on them. They were on her. Clara sat beside him, gripping his hand so tightly her knuckles were pale. She hadn't let go since they'd loaded him into the back. Her hair was a mess, her makeup smudged, but her gaze was unshakable. "You should have let me come with you," she whispered. "You did." "No, I didn't. You called Vega." Clara hesitated. "I had to," she said. "You said not to, but I couldn't sit there waiting for a call that might never come. I couldn't." Her voice cracked. Miles turned his head slowly to face her. "You didn't betray me," he said. "You saved me." Clara swallowed hard. "You saved me first," she whispered, and then quietly, like a truth that had been waiting too long, "Don't leave Miles. Please, don't go." He blinked slowly. "I promised Ethan I'd come back." At the hospital, they wheeled him in on a gurney. Clara followed like a shadow, refusing to leave. But when the nurse stopped her at the curtain, she froze. "Family only," the nurse said gently. Clara's mouth opened, then closed, and before she could form a sentence, a small voice shouted from the hallway, "He's my dad." Ethan barreled through the door, arms outstretched, backpack swinging. A nurse tried to stop him, but Miles waved them off. "Let him through." Ethan climbed onto the edge of the bed, eyes wide. "You okay?" Miles chuckled, wincing. "I've been worse. You smell like rust." "That's just hospital charm." Clara stood at the doorway watching, and suddenly she realized this wasn't just a man and his son. This was a home, broken, rebuilt, held together by heart instead of walls. She stepped forward. "Can I come in now?" she asked. Ethan looked at the nurse. "She's with us." The nurse smiled. "Then she's family." Hours later, after the scans, the stitching, the morphine haze. Clara sat at Miles's bedside, their hands intertwined beneath the scratchy hospital blanket. The room buzzed with low hums, machines, fluorescent lights, the lull of passing time. "I used to think love was a weakness," Clara said softly. Miles didn't open his eyes, but his fingers tightened around hers. "I thought needing someone meant I'd lost something of myself. Like independence was a fortress, and love was the crack in the wall." She turned to face him fully. "But I was wrong. You're not a crack in the wall, Miles. You're the reason I stopped building them." He finally looked at her, and said the words that had been buried too long. "I see you now, Clara. Not just the CEO, not just the survivor. I see the woman who gave my son his smile back." Her throat caught. He continued, voice hoarse but steady. "And I'm not afraid to love someone I see." She kissed his forehead. A tear landed beside his temple. In the hallway, Ethan sat beside Detective Laura Vega, sharing a vending machine sandwich and trading facts about octopuses. Apparently, they had 3 hearts. Laura was mildly horrified. "Do you think he'll be okay?" Ethan asked. Laura nodded. "Your dad's a tough one." Ethan leaned back. "He doesn't like when people call him a hero." Laura smirked. "That's how you know he is one." The next morning, the sun broke through the windows like a promise. Soft and golden. Miles stirred. Clara was asleep in the chair beside him, her hand still in his. He looked at her, truly looked, and thought, if surviving was the point, maybe this is what it was for. Later that day, hospital discharge papers in hand, Clara stepped outside into the crisp winter air. Miles walked beside her, arm around Ethan's shoulder, a slow but steady pace. As they reached the curb, a reporter spotted them. "Mr. Rowan, Miss Wells, can we get a statement about the arrest?" About the attack, Miles held up a hand. No comment. Clara turned firm but calm. "But I will say this." The camera rolled. She looked directly into the lens. Not all heroes wear capes. Some carry mops. Some carry their sons. And the bravest ones carry the weight of the past without letting it crush who they are. She turned away. The reporter stood in stunned silence. Miles glanced at her. "You just made a headline." Clara smiled. "I was aiming for a legacy." That evening, back at the penthouse, Ethan pulled a blanket over Miles' legs as they sat on the couch watching cartoons. Clara emerged from the kitchen holding a steaming mug. "You know," she said, handing it to Miles, "you could stay. Just until you're fully healed." Miles raised an eyebrow. "Just for healing?" She smirked. "We'll see." Ethan chimed in. "Can we make pancakes tomorrow?" Miles looked at Clara. She nodded. "With chocolate chips." He leaned back, exhaled, and let the warmth of something long forgotten return. Belonging, not as a janitor, not as a soldier, as a father, a man, and maybe something more. And somewhere far from the noise and weight of the past, the three of them sat not as survivors but as a family beginning again. The city had never looked softer. Snowflakes drifted like whispers through the night air, brushing the cobblestone paths of Boston Common with powdered silver. String lights wrapped the bare trees in golden halos, and laughter rose from food carts warm and thick with cinnamon and cider. And beneath it all, something brighter than lights pulsed belonging. Clara stood near the center of the park, hands tucked into a navy wool coat, scanning the crowd. And then she saw them. Miles and Ethan walking slowly through the crowd, bundled in matching scarves Clara had bought them just that morning. Ethan ran ahead first. "Clara." She knelt down as he threw his arms around her. "You came." She smiled. "I told Dad this was the best night of the year," Ethan said, breathless. "I didn't want him to miss it." Clara looked up at Miles. "You okay, walking this much?" He gave that half-smile she was beginning to read like a second language. Hurts less when there's something worth walking toward. They joined the crowd near the center lawn where a small stage had been set up for the community ceremony. Local kids were preparing to present a mural to the city, a painting they'd made together in tribute to everyday heroes. Clara sat between Ethan and Miles, the three of them forming their own quiet constellation. "I used to come here every winter," Clara murmured, watching the lights. "But I never stayed long. Too many families, too many reminders." Miles looked at her. "And now," she smiled gently, "now it reminds me what I could have missed if I stayed cold forever." On stage, a volunteer cleared her throat and tapped the mic. "We'd like to thank our sponsors for tonight's Winter Lights Festival," she began. "But before we light the final lanterns, we have a special guest who asked to say a few words." Clara looked up confused. The announcer smiled. "Ethan Rowan." "Would you come up here, please?" Clara's eyes widened. "Did you know about this?" she asked Miles. He chuckled. "He told me not to tell you." Ethan ran up the steps, sketchbook in hand, cheeks flushed pink from the cold. He stepped up to the mic, tiny fingers gripping the edge. "Hi," he said. "I'm Ethan. I'm 10. I used to think heroes only lived in movies or comic books." A soft murmur of laughter. "But then I met one. Actually, I live with one." Miles shifted in his seat, visibly uncomfortable. Clara reached over and squeezed his hand. Ethan continued. "My dad used to say janitors are invisible, that people only notice us when the floor is sticky. But I see him. I see him every day." He opened his sketchbook, held it high. It was a new drawing. A man in a janitor's uniform holding a mop like a staff, standing in front of a CEO in a power suit. But they weren't apart anymore. They were side by side, and behind them a little boy holding both their hands. The crowd hushed. Ethan finished. "I think heroes aren't about saving people with powers. They're about choosing to stand when nobody else will. And that's what my dad does." A pause, and Clara too. Clara gasped softly. Ethan beamed at her from the stage. She saw him, before the world did, and she let us be a family. Miles blinked hard, jaw clenched. Ethan stepped back from the mic. The crowd erupted in applause. Later, as lanterns floated into the sky like glowing prayers, Miles stood beside Clara near the edge of the pond watching Ethan chase fireflies with other kids. "He's different," Clara said. "More open, freer." "He's been watching us," Miles replied. She turned to him. "And what has he seen?" He paused, then looked at her, not just saw. "He's seen me come back to life." Clara's breath caught. "And what have you seen, Miles?" He reached for her hand, held it with reverence. "I've seen a woman strong enough to lead a city, and brave enough to sit on the floor with a janitor and eat powdered cheese." She laughed, eyes wet. "You know," she said softly, "I never had a family that felt like this." Miles leaned closer. "You do now," a small voice interrupted. "Are we going home together tonight?" Ethan asked, appearing between them with a marshmallow on a stick. Clara knelt. "What do you think?" Ethan grinned. "I think we belong to each other now." Miles ruffled his hair. Smartest kid in the park. As the final lantern soared into the night sky, Clara rested her head on Miles's shoulder. He looked up, watched one rise higher than the others, glowing steady, almost defiant. And he whispered more to himself than anyone. "Some lights don't come from the sky. They come from the people who finally see us." That night, Boston shimmered not with snow, but with second chances. And 3 people walked home not as survivors of the past, but as builders of something whole. The halls were still. No chatter, no meetings, no flashing emails on oversized monitors. Just silence. The kind of silence that speaks in reverence. Miles Rowan walked slowly down the gleaming corridor of Wells Tech one last time, pushing the mop bucket that had been his companion for nearly 4 years. It squeaked just slightly, not out of wear, but as if it too knew this was goodbye. He stopped at the far end of the executive floor, the corner where it all began. Right there, beneath the chrome light fixture and the faint scuff mark from a security officer's boot, he had once stood invisible. And now, everything had changed. But not because the world saw him, because he had finally let himself be seen. He bent down, dipped the mop, and made one slow, final pass across the marble tile. It gleamed like glass under the rising sun. Footsteps approached. He didn't need to turn around. "I thought you'd be gone before I woke up," Clara said softly. Miles straightened, resting his arms on the mop handle. Didn't want to ghost the place. She stepped beside him, holding 2 paper cups of coffee. She handed him one. "You didn't need to come in at all." He looked at her, smiled. "I wanted to leave the floor cleaner than I found it." Clara's lips curled gently. "That's the most Miles thing I've ever heard." They stood there, sipping quietly. The golden morning light filtered through the panoramic windows, warming the glass walls and softening every sharp edge. After a moment, she said, "They offered me a feature in Forbes. I heard, apparently saving the company while falling in love with the janitor is great press." Miles chuckled. "That the headline?" "No," she said. "The headline's worse." She pulled out her phone and read it aloud. "Ice Queen melts for mop-wielding hero." Miles groaned. "God help us." She laughed, then turned serious. I turned it down. He looked surprised. "I'm not interested in proving anything to strangers," she said. "I used to chase those headlines like they were oxygen. But now—" She looked at him. "I want a life that doesn't need to be published to be real." Miles nodded slowly. "That sounds a lot like peace." They walked down together to the lobby this time, not in silence, but in step. Janitors, executives. It didn't matter. People looked up as they passed. And not one of them saw a janitor and a CEO. They saw something else. Something whole. Outside, Ethan waited on the bench, scarf wrapped twice around his neck hands, cradling a styrofoam cup of hot cocoa. He lit up when he saw them. "You ready?" Dad Miles nodded. "I'm all yours now, kid." Clara sat beside Ethan and ruffled his hair. "Guess what? What the mayor's office approved the grant for the community center. Ethan gasped. Really? She nodded. And it's going to be named after someone very special. He leaned in. Who? Clara smiled. The Turner Heart Center. Ethan blinked. That's my mom's last name. Miles swallowed. His voice came low. She would have loved that. Ethan looked between the two of them, then said, Will it have art classes? Of course, Clara said, and a reading nook, the best one in Boston. He grinned. Then I'm going to teach other kids to draw heroes. Miles put an arm around him. You already do. Later that evening, back at home, Miles unpacked a box of old uniforms. Janitor shirts, worn boots, a faded name tag. He paused, held it in his hand, then placed it gently in the box. Clara stood behind him, arms wrapped around his waist. Regret, she asked. He shook his head. Gratitude. She rested her chin on his shoulder. You know, she whispered, some people chase the American dream their whole lives and never find it. Miles turned to her. Sometimes the dream is just a clean floor, a warm home, and someone who finally sees you. She smiled. Then you, Miles Rowan, are the richest man I know. That night, Clara tucked Ethan into bed with a kiss on the forehead. As she turned off the light, he whispered, Are we going to be like this forever? She paused, smiled in the dark. Forever's a long time, she said. But love, that's longer. In the final scene, Miles stood in the doorway of their modest but beautiful new home, a former 2-story row house now painted with warmth. A small Community Heart logo, hand-drawn by Ethan, hung on the porch wall. He looked out at the world, no longer hiding from it, then turned back inside where laughter waited and real life was being lived. I used to think some people were born invisible, like the world had already decided their worth and nothing could change it. But I was wrong. We're not invisible. We're just waiting for someone to look long enough, to see the light. Sometimes the people we overlook are the ones quietly holding the world together. A janitor, a child, a woman learning how to open her heart again. And maybe love isn't found in grand gestures, but in a mop, a drawing, a moment of being truly seen. If this story moved you, if it made you smile, tear up, or think a little deeper, let us know in the comments where in the world are you listening from. We'd love to hear your voice, your thoughts, your heart. And if you believe in more stories like this, stories that heal, inspire, and remind us of the goodness in people, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you never miss a moment of hope. From our storytelling family to yours, thank you for spending your precious time with us. Until next time, keep seeing the unseen, keep choosing kindness, and keep believing in second chances.